Some people wait until your happiest day to remind you where they think you belong. Mine chose my wedding. The day I was supposed to feel loved became the day my own family decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. They mocked my dress, my background, my cheap side of the family, and worst of all, they kept reminding everyone that I came from nothing. But before the reception ended, one truth changed the entire room forever. Because the man they thought abandoned me years ago was not who they believed he was, and when they discovered who my real father actually was, their faces changed instantly. My name is Claire Donovan. I am 29 years old and I live in Boston, USA. And this is the story of how my family humiliated me for being poor at my own wedding, until the truth about my father destroyed everything they thought they knew. I grew up hearing the same sentence repeatedly. Be grateful for what you have. Not because we were humble, because we were constantly reminded we had less than everyone else. My mother raised me alone. At least that's what I believed. She never talked much about my father, only that he left before I was old enough to remember him. And over time, that absence became part of my identity. My relatives never let me forget it either. Especially my Aunt Linda. To her, I was always the poor girl, the charity case at family gatherings, the cousin with limited opportunities. Even after I built my own life, graduated, and got engaged, they still treated me like someone beneath them. Not openly cruel, just carefully humiliating, the kind that hides behind smiles. When my fiancé, Ethan, proposed, I thought maybe things would change. I was wrong. The moment wedding planning started, the comments began. Can they even afford a proper venue? Who's paying for this? I hope Claire doesn't expect too much. Small comments, sharp enough to leave marks. My mother stayed quiet most of the time. Too quiet. Like she was carrying something heavier than embarrassment. At the time, I didn't understand why. The wedding day arrived beautifully. The venue glowed. The music played softly. And for a few hours, I actually felt happy. Until the reception started. That's when the humiliation became public. During dinner, my aunt stood up with a wine glass in her hand. Smiling. Always smiling. To Claire, she announced loudly. The room quieted politely. Then she laughed softly and added, who proved that even girls from nothing can marry well. People laughed awkwardly. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. And I just sat there frozen. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. But the damage was already done. Then came another comment. At least she won't have to worry about money anymore. More laughter. More embarrassment wrapped as jokes. And the worst part, no one stopped them. I looked at my mother. And for the first time in my life, she looked afraid. Not angry. Afraid. Later that evening, she pulled me aside near the hallway. Her hands were shaking slightly. There's something I should have told you years ago, she whispered. My stomach tightened instantly. Because mothers only speak like that when truths are about to explode. Before I could ask anything, the venue entrance suddenly became louder. People turning. Whispering. Staff moving quickly. A black luxury car had just arrived outside. And from it stepped a man I had never seen before. Tall, older, calm. But the moment my mother saw him, she stopped breathing normally. The entire room shifted. Because this wasn't a random guest. People recognized him immediately. Whispers spread across the reception hall. Fast. My aunt's confident smile disappeared first. Because suddenly, she looked nervous. The man walked directly toward us. Not toward the bride and groom table. Toward me. I stood there confused as he stopped inches away. His eyes stayed on mine the entire time, like he had been searching for this moment for years. Then he said something that made the entire reception fall silent. "I think it's time you knew the truth." My mother started crying immediately. Not softly, not carefully. Like years of pressure had finally broken open. The man reached into his jacket slowly, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me. Inside were documents, old records, letters, and one name repeated again and again. Mine, connected to his. I looked up at him with shaking hands. "What is this?" I whispered. The room waited silently. And then he answered, "I'm your father." The entire reception exploded into whispers, shock moving table to table like electricity. Because the man standing in front of me was not poor, not forgotten, not ordinary. He was one of the wealthiest business owners in the state. And suddenly, every insult they made about me being poor collapsed in real time. I looked toward my aunt, and for the first time all night, she couldn't look back at me. The reception hall no longer sounded like a wedding. It sounded like shock. Whispers spreading from table to table. People staring, trying to connect the story they believed for years, with the man now standing in front of me. My hands were still shaking around the folder, because nothing felt real anymore. "I know this is overwhelming," the man said softly. But overwhelming wasn't the word. My entire identity had just shifted in the middle of my wedding reception. My mother wiped tears from her face quickly, and for the first time in years, I saw guilt in her eyes. Not fear. Guilt. "You lied to me," I whispered. Her voice cracked immediately. "I was trying to protect you." That sentence felt heavier than everything else that night. Because protection built on silence eventually becomes pain. The room stayed silent around us. No music. No conversation. Even the staff had stopped moving. Because everyone understood something enormous had just happened. The man looked at me carefully. "I never abandoned you," he said quietly. I stared at him. Because that sentence alone destroyed 29 years of belief. Then he explained everything. Misunderstandings. Manipulation from relatives. Legal pressure years ago. And letters that were never delivered. Each sentence rewrote another part of my past. I looked toward my Aunt Linda slowly. And suddenly her nervousness made sense. Because she already knew pieces of the truth. Maybe not all of it. But enough. Enough to stay quiet for years while I was humiliated. "You knew?" I asked her. The room instantly shifted toward her. Her face turned pale. But no explanation came out properly. Because lies collapse when truth arrives unexpectedly. My father spoke again. "I tried contacting your mother for years," he said. Then his expression hardened slightly. "But certain family members made sure I stayed away." That sentence hit the room like glass breaking. And my aunt immediately looked away. Because now everyone understood. The woman who mocked me all night helped hide the truth about my father for decades. Suddenly, every insult she made sounded different. Not arrogant. Defensive. Ethan stepped beside me quietly, holding my hand tighter now. Not because I needed support from humiliation anymore, but because my world was changing too fast to stand still. One of my cousins finally whispered, "Oh my God." And honestly, that was exactly how it felt. My father then did something no one expected. He turned toward the guests calmly and said, "My daughter was never poor." A pause. She was simply kept away from the truth. No one laughed after that. Not one person. Because suddenly the poor girl story no longer existed. And without that story, some people in that room had nothing left. My aunt tried one last time to recover control. "We were only joking," she said weakly. I looked at her directly. "No," I replied calmly. "You were comfortable humiliating someone you thought couldn't defend herself." Silence. Complete silence. And for the first time in my life, she had no comeback. No smile. No clever remark. Only embarrassment. The rest of the reception changed completely after that. People who once ignored me suddenly wanted conversations. Attention. Connection. But I noticed something important. Respect that appears after status is revealed is not real respect. My father stayed beside me most of the evening. Careful. Patient. Like he knew he couldn't repair years in one night. But he still tried. And somehow that mattered. Later that night, after most guests left, my mother finally sat beside me quietly. "I thought keeping you away from him would make life simpler," she admitted. I stared ahead silently, then asked the question that had lived inside me for years. Did he really want me? Her eyes filled again instantly. "Yes," she whispered. "Always." That answer broke something inside me. Not painfully, just deeply. Because part of me had spent my entire life believing I wasn't wanted. Weeks later, everything changed publicly. Not because I announced anything. Because the truth spread on its own. Family members suddenly became polite. Careful. Respectful. But I noticed something strange. The people who respected money the most respected truth the least. And my aunt, she stopped attending family gatherings for a while. Not because anyone forced her. Because humiliation feels heavier when you created it yourself. One evening, my father and I stood outside a restaurant after dinner, talking like strangers trying to become family. And he looked at me quietly before saying, "You deserved the truth much earlier." I nodded slowly, then smiled faintly. "Maybe," I replied. But at least now, everyone else had to hear it too. And honestly, that was enough.